Hi, my name is John Richardson. Here we are, November the 5th, 2019. I am talking to you from Toronto, Canada. And today we're having a group discussion about the problem of FATCA, Americans abroad, what to do with these things. And it's going to be sort of a round table. I have three interesting guests, and rather than introduce them myself, I would ask that each of you introduce yourself. So beginning with Jenny.
Okay, hello, I'm Jenny. I'm the FATCA claimant in the UK legal challenge.
I'm
Next.
Suzanne Herman, calling from Vancouver, Canada, and I am a compliant U.S. taxpayer living in Canada as both Canadian and U.S. citizen. That in itself is something to maybe not celebrate so much, but I'm happy to talk about it.
Moving
And I'm
on.
Keith. And I'm Keith Redmond. I have been working for the past number of years and fighting for the rights of Americans overseas and accidental Americans. I'm founder of the American Expatriates Facebook group.
Okay, so we have, I think, a fairly diverse group geographically, and I think a fairly diverse group in terms of actual experience with this thing. One of the reasons for having the call today is that there are core challenges to various aspects of FATCA. There's one in the UK, there's one in Canada, and Jenny's been behind the one in the UK. So I wonder, Jenny, if you tell us a little bit about what that is and why you think it's important.
Yeah, the FATCA case in the UK is a lot to do with the data, the breaches of data protection laws, the GDPR and other data protection norms in the UK and in Europe. And so it's all to do with the data that's being transferred being disproportionate because, as you all probably know, very, very few Americans overseas and accidentals actually owe any US tax. Famously, what we often pay is for the compliance costs and renunciation costs and things like that. There's actually no tax actually payable. So to be transferring our data under a so-called tax act or a tax compliance act is completely disproportionate, given that we actually don't owe any tax. So it's also about the failure of HMRC and other tax authorities to be clear with people on what they're sending and when and how much freedom of information requests are being denied about that. So we're being made transparent to the government, and while the government's hiding itself from us. So the case is about that as well.
Can I ask you just a couple of questions by way of clarification on this that I've been curious about?
Yeah.
And I recognize these are not necessarily black and white. First of all, is it your position that the concept of FATCA itself is okay, but you just think it's overreach?
That's a really good question. I think the way it works is it's unworkable because it allows everyone's data to be sent kind of without them ever being informed or having any ability to check the accuracy of the data or anything like that. I guess I would have to kind of try to envisage something that I think my solution would be something like exchange on request, which is what happened pre-FATCA, where there's a reasonable cause for transferring the data, and that was clearly discussed between two tax authorities why they needed the data and discussed with the data subject. And I think automatic exchange of data like this is very dangerous. It's like it's bulk surveillance basically. There needs to be reasons for transferring things, not just automatic transferring of everyone's data.
So yeah, the information on request still exists. Second question. I noticed you said today, and things I've read about your lawsuit uh, always include the statistically accurate, I believe, claim that those who do file U.S. taxes don't owe any tax. My question is, would your position be different if statistically the people impacted, that is, U.S. persons, did owe tax?
So like if a majority of us did owe tax rather than didn't.
Instead of filing a nil return, you're filing a return where you're sending them $10,000, and this was the norm.
Well, if you don't live in the country that's, claiming tax from you, I mean, obviously that's unjust, in itself. So that would be, but I guess then the case would be different. Maybe the case would be more about that country applying tax to the tax residents of other countries rather than being about the data transfer. But
And your position presumably is that the U.S. imposition of worldwide taxation on people who do not live in the United States is unjust. Is that your position?
Yeah, definitely. That's my personal position. Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I think that in the current cases where sometimes I guess people do owe tax, I think that it's always because of some, gap in the tax treaty or some kind of injustice. Like I think recently in France, there was a social tax that the IRS wasn't recognizing and people were being taxed unjustly there. So I think most of the time when people do owe tax to the United States, if they don't live there, it's unjust. I mean, the citizen taxation, non-resident taxation just doesn't make sense in the mind of any normal person.
Could you envisage any situation at all where the U.S. imposing worldwide taxation on people who don't live in the United States would be just?
If they don't live in the United States and they don't earn any money in the United States, I don't see how that can be just. You're paying tax and working and living in another country.
Okay, all right. All right, that's interesting. So I looked at your website earlier today.
Yeah.
And congratulations on where you've come. So you've got, I think, 70,000 pounds approximately at the moment.
Yeah, it's just over that amount. Yeah, and
So that's the good news. The bad news is you need a lot more.
Yeah. The funding needs to keep coming in to cover the cost of the various different expert barristers in the different areas of law, EU law and UK law and data protection law and technology and tax principles. There's lots of different areas that this case covers, and we need to be able to keep paying the costs. The risk is that if we don't have the money to pay the costs, then the things get delayed. We can't get the people that we want to work on the things that we need. So we still need the funding to be coming in. It's not it's different case now because the money is going to the casework now. So when it was when it was just before we got the 50,000, that was before we pushed it over the line. It's kind of like just pledged to crowd justice, but nobody gets charged. And then after it got over the line, which thank goodness, and thank you so much for everybody who helped with that. That was incredible to get over the line, even a couple of days early.
Yeah, that's great.
Exceeded the first target. So so I'm we're still very much pushing this, and we're going to the Brussels hearing next week, and we're very much want to keep the momentum up and keep the funding coming in so that we can continue to pay for everything we need with the casework.
Yeah, I did, by the way. I actually met your lawyer a couple of weeks ago in Barcelona.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, he mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, so, I think that, you've got an exceptionally good legal team. So, I think that the odds for this succeeding are about as good as they can be. But, certainly, you've got to get a lot more people contributing. Why do you think, with all the people in Keith's group, how many are in your group, Keith?
Right now we have, as of this moment, about a little over 6,200.
And Suzanne, the FATCA Canada lawsuit was funded, which was raised, about $600,000? It was largely funded from the Isaac Brock Society, so we were able to do it there. Why do you think, with all of the, and actually, this may be a question for Suzanne or Keith, why do you think, with all the people who obviously have an interest in this, how come, you didn't raise 500,000 pounds in 24 hours? What is it that, makes people somehow, reluctant to contribute to something that's just so obviously in their interest?
You asked me why.
Why is this so hard? You think this would be a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I don't know. maybe people feel discouraged because, we lost round one.
Right. And I think people need to realize, and I can understand where people can be discouraged because, let's say, round one was lost, whether that be in Canada or, let's say, in France with the FATCA lawsuit that is going on there. But I think Americans overseas, and also accidental Americans to a certain degree, but Americans overseas need to realize that any change is going to have to be done not just in round one. It's going to be in round two, or maybe round three, or maybe round four. I mean, look at the change that has to occur in the United States, where it had to go before the Supreme Court. So I think people should not be discouraged and have to fight for what is right, and to be able to give what they can to these lawsuits to keep it going to the next round and get it up to the respective Supreme Courts in Canada, and if the case is in the UK. I know with Fabien Lagre in France, now he's taking it to the European Court of Justice through the European Commission. You got to keep moving forward. So the discouragement is understandable, but that can't stop. Right.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that, you can say, well, such and such lost round one. The point is that whoever loses appealing anyway. I mean, what if we won round one? We'd still be faced with the appeal.
Good point.
This is not going to be over until it goes through, the whole judicial system. And as it moves further along in the judicial system, the chances of getting a better hearing, increase. So, this is, I think I've seen said, okay, it's a marathon, not a sprint. But now apparently,
and John, excuse me, and it's not just done in a silo, because when you go from round one to round two, there's more noise out there about the whole problem and the plight of Americans overseas, and it gets press. So that's also another benefit of keep moving forward with this.
Oh my goodness! If you compare the amount of press now to what it was 10 years ago, it's night and day. All this stuff was unheard of years ago.
Yeah, and the overall level of education.
Yes,
exactly. Well, if you give up, you get the results you want, don't you?
Well, as Henry Ford of Ford Motor Company fame would say, whether you think you can do it or whether you think you can't do it, you're right. So I think it's important, for people keep a long-term view of this. But secondly, I assume that you would agree with me that this is an incredibly unjust set of circumstances. Yes?
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it seems to me all you're betting on to get this stuff changed, really is time. Jenny, you were talking about a hearing next week in Brussels or something like that. Do you want to tell us a little about that?
It's related to the petition, the EU petition that they've had hearings on. They had the hearing in EU Parliament last July, where they passed unanimously to support accidental Americans. And it's I think the longest hearing they've had. It's longer than the previous few that they've done, I think, which have been like about 30-minute slots. I think that ended up being 40 minutes. This is over 2 hours, this one. So it'll be the longest time they've discussed this issue. It's about FATCA and accidental Americans.
And it's specifically focused on that issue, correct? Specifically.
Yes,
exactly.
Yeah, and all the main players, MEPs that have supported us for a long time, like Sophie Intveld and some from the UK, and they'll be there. And I think
it's important to give a shout out to Jude Ryan, who is an accidental American who really spearheaded this position. Yeah, and he needs to be absolutely acknowledged for his tenacity.
I've seen him at the videos of the hearings. He does a fabulous job and articulates the issues very, very well. Who else will be there next week in Brussels? So Jude and who knows?
Well, we have Fabien. Oh, I'm sorry, Jenny. Go ahead if you want to.
Yeah. Filippo will be there. Who's leading
your lawyer. Your lawyer.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that could be nothing but helpful. Okay, that's
Yeah.
Right.
very good. So that's
And we,
apparently a 2-hour thing, right? Yeah.
right,
Keith?
and we have Fabien Laagra, who is going to be testifying at the hearing. He's the president of the Association of Accidental Americans in France. And there is a contingency of accidental Americans across Europe who will be attending this hearing,
Mhm.
as well as a couple representatives from some of the, I know that there's going to be a representative there from one of the American overseas organizations. So
You know
there'll
what?
be,
You know which one?
yeah, it's ARO, the Association of Americans Resident Overseas.
Okay. Well, that's very, very good. So, what we have coming together, are a bunch of people who are, really working hard to try to do something about this. But, well, moving over to Keith and Suzanne for a second here. We've got people like Jenny, like Jude Ryan, like Fabienne, like Keith, okay, and others, of course. Have really,
And you,
okay, and Solomon, and I mean, there's a bunch of them, okay, not a lot of them, but there's a critical mass. Who've been working, very, very hard on, trying to get change for the group of people collectively who are impacted by this. Do you feel that, or to what extent do you feel that the vast majority of people affected by this are, sort of actively care about change?
Well,
that
the ones
actively,
who do, the
Suzanne?
ones who do stand out, and they're few and far between. Unfortunately, I mean, and John, you talk about time. Like, you actually believe that this will be fixed. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I
Because
do
in the
actually. Yeah.
meantime, in the meantime, people are being ground to grift. People like me who aren't rich but pay exorbitant accounting fees because we have a small corporation in Canada, because we have a foreign trust that has no money in it. As a matter of fact, the other day we got the nasty letter that we thought wouldn't come to us, but it's the demand letter. If we don't tick a certain box, we'll be fined $10,000. These things are impossible to comprehend. Having to normal everyday people who just want to have normal everyday lives where they live. And yeah, I totally regret coming into compliance. I look around me and I see people who are living perfectly normal lives. And here I am faced with the possibility of having to stop complying because it's just too onerous.
Yeah, it's quite
Now,
interesting to me. I mean, having been, well, I guess, anybody who's involved in this is really a permanent student of the problem, because it keeps changing. But I have actually come to see that, for all these people who never knew about this, and they find out about it and they come into compliance, I've actually come to see that coming into compliance is the first step to renunciation, because there's just no way to do it. There's no way to keep it up. There's no way to afford it. I mean,
and
unless
the
you're
rules keep changing, and the rules keep changing.
yes,
Case in point,
and getting
transition
worse.
tax and guilty. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
they keep moving the goalposts, and it's further away and more difficult to get there. Impossible to get there. Now, I think that many people who promote non-compliance, they're looking at this. It's easy to be cynical and say, "Geez, I'm better off not complying." But by the same token, if you give up and you don't do anything, nothing is ever going to change.
And that doesn't solve the problem of their data being sent to a foreign government who they have no idea what that government's doing with that data or why it even has it. It's
yeah.
just, I mean,
Well, we have an idea what they're doing. It's a big data dump. They're not
yeah.
doing too much with it, which is adding insult to injury here.
But it's, I mean, data is not a benign thing. They're holding it, like you say, a data dump. Who's looking after this data? What systems is it in? How vulnerable
I
is it
think they'll.
to hacking and leaks?
I think,
We don't know.
well, FBARs were subjected to the same thing when they were all on paper. They had them stored in big containers of FBARs that I think they really just used them when they were trying to build a case against someone. That's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
Yeah.
Well,
They're
I
not
mean, this is
cross-referencing it with people.
sort of for everybody here. So now we're talking about, the difficulty of the compliance, and, no argument about that. I mean, it's terrible. And we're also, so then, I mean, everybody describes the situation in terms of how it most affects them. And Jenny talks about the data problem. But would everybody agree that the root of the problem is the intention on the part of the United States to impose worldwide taxation on people who don't live in the United States? Would you agree that's the root of the problem?
Absolutely.
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 It's the root of the problem. And a sort of finger of the problem is treating everything foreign as punishable. The foreign happens to be where we're living.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's how you see, let me just throw out a thought here, a comment, put this in some context. I mean, sure, the U.S. Internal Revenue Code, and I think U.S. culture in general, is premised on, the idea that anything foreign is suspicious and probably evil and should be penalized. I mean, I think that's, I think certainly the internal revenue, that's one of the fundamental pillars of the Internal Revenue Code. But another thing that I find interesting about the Internal Revenue Code, and everybody should, read it someday, starting with the very first section. And what it says is that basically every individual is subject to tax on worldwide income unless you're a non-resident alien, right? So in other words, the whole thing is set up so there's a presumption of worldwide taxation on everybody. And that's quite different from, say, Canada, for example, that puts worldwide taxation on everybody who is resident in Canada, right? I mean, there's a huge, I think, philosophical and linguistic difference in this thing.
So they include the whole planet and make exclusions for people.
Exactly right. Yeah, everybody
point.
on the planet is subject to U.S. worldwide taxation, including all the rules that punish anything foreign, right? And, what I see as a big part of the problem here, I mean, I see FATCA somewhat differently. I think that FATCA actually operates to create U.S. taxpayers in other countries. Because the banks are busy, hunting for people, the U.S. place of birth, and the compliance people. It's sort of an unholy alliance, right? Or kind
any
of,
type of indicia, U.S. indicia, just to go after them. Yeah.
Moving around. Oh my God, you got to be filing these tax returns. Now let's look at this, this Elizabeth Warren thing, which has gotten some discussion over the weekend. And, I mean, I don't know why I've not seen this commented on, right? So she's talking about the importance of FATCA, right? Her advisors identify both citizenship and taxation as necessary conditions for a wealth tax working. Why citizenship taxation? Well, because that way people can't leave the United States to escape the wealth tax, right? Why FATCA? Well, because that's necessary to identify, all the assets outside the United States upon which this wealth tax can be inflicted, right? But if we look at what's happened on the income tax level, right? I mean, all kinds of people have been identified as U.S. taxpayers and have agreed to file income tax returns. Why wouldn't the same thing happen with the wealth tax returns? I mean, I don't see any reason why not. I think it would. And the real danger here is over time, through the language of the Internal Revenue Code, FATCA, and the addition of a wealth tax, which again presumably would apply to citizens, is they're using this thing to actually get a share of, people's assets in other countries, who have very peripheral ties to the United States. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, but I mean, the problem is most of the people don't, I mean, the vast majority of the people whose data is being sent don't owe any and could never owe any US tax because they earn under the foreign earned income exclusion. I think only about 10% of people in the whole UK earn anything over that. So if you think, Americans overseas are roughly similar, well, it's only 10%. And so
And
there's
even if they did, and even if they earned over the FEIE,
they
there's
still have the foreign
foreign
tax
tax
credit.
credits.
Yeah,
Exactly, because a lot of Americans overseas live in high tax jurisdictions,
Yeah,
which is
most
much
do.
greater
Yeah.
than the United States. Yes,
Yeah.
but
And
even
Yeah.
regardless
what
of
about
that, yeah, go ahead.
what about the quality of the data? Because
Yeah.
when you file your 8938s under FATCA and FBARs, you report the highest balance of the year. The IGAs, at least the one in Canada, reports year-end balance.
Yeah, it's garbage data. That's why it's funny, Elizabeth Warren, I guess, wants to strengthen it. She must not know that they can't use the data anyway. I mean, I don't know what she's planning to do with it.
And what about reciprocity? No mention of that, is there?
Or lack thereof.
Brandishing of this? What's that?
Well,
I said lack thereof.
we would all agree that a significant part of the impact of this goes away if the U.S. gets rid of citizenship taxation, right?
Absolutely, that is
So,
the objective.
all right. So if the objective is to
Okay.
get rid of citizenship taxation, okay. Now let's go back to the discussion on the various blogs and that. So it seems to me that if the objective is to get rid of citizenship taxation, then would we be in agreement that this is a problem that is far bigger than the circumstances of any one individual?
Correct.
Well,
Yes.
absolutely, but every individual is needed.
Yeah.
Well, I think that every individual needs to support the principle, and I think actively support the principle that this CBT thing has got to be changed. So it's interesting to me that on that particular point, I mean, I think that most people wish it would go away, but I think there's very, very little support, for actually trying to take affirmative steps to get there. You agree with that? Disagree?
Well, I've been to
I
my
will say,
congressman for years, and nothing. I haven't received anything, just an ear from his office. There's been no sort of motion in order to move it forward, anything like that. I told his office about Congressman Holding's bill, and he said he'd keep an eye out for it, kind of thing. But beyond, I think they find it's just too big to deal with.
Yeah. It's easy to just think, oh, this shouldn't be my problem. This is someone else's problem, and nobody wants to claim it and do anything about it.
What are the chances of success if there isn't a strong critical mass of support?
Zero.
It's going to be very difficult if there's not going to be a strong critical mass of support. And it can't come down to just each individual's personal circumstances. Each individual has to make a decision for him or herself on their own individual circumstances, whether to continue complying in the U.S. tax system or to, for whatever reason, enter the U.S. tax system because they're going to renounce, or another viable decision is to not comply. However, with all of those remedies, temporary remedies, that doesn't solve the overarching problem.
Yeah. They're only individual solutions. They're not a solution for the community. I mean, my case
Right.
absolutely depends on having a huge amount of support from the community.
Well, as
Right.
does the appeal of our
In the Canadian case,
yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, all of these things do. But what we've got going on here is, a lot of people who, now this is understandable. I mean, I'm not being critical by saying this, but I think that this is factually correct. A a lot of people who are interested in mitigating the effects on them personally in the short run, and that's it, and are not really willing to, other than having a wish that this would change, are not really willing to commit any resources at all to getting change. At least that's my impression of this. And I base that. Why do I say that? Well, you've only got 70,000 pounds.
Yeah.
I mean, we can quibble about the numbers, but everybody would agree it's at least a couple of million people out there who are aware of this as a problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, I look at the number of backers being over 200, and I'm supremely grateful to every single one of those people who have contributed. But given that some of our groups, like Keith's group, has over 6,000 people in it, I just, and if everyone just gave just whatever amount they wanted, even if just a small amount, it makes a huge difference. If we could get, because the number of supporters is very important as well to show how many people are affected by this. And we know there are loads of people affected by this because we've been following it for years. I mean, I've been involved for 3.5 years now, and it's just, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who are affected.
And I think
Well,
another point to drive home, excuse me, but another point to drive home, it's also those Americans overseas who may not be affected today
Yes.
by this, but they don't know if they're going to be affected tomorrow. Case in point, Suzanne, transition tax and guilty. Who would have thought that a few years ago?
Absolutely.
Who would have thought that? Everything can be honky-dory one day. The next day, something changes with policy and laws in the U.S., and it puts that American overseas who was very comfortable into a situation where they could be financially ruined. So I think it's also important for those people to step up and to contribute and to stand up for Americans overseas.
Yes. And if they're worried about, they don't want to stick their head up above the parapet, or, they're worried about their privacy, these things contributing to this UK case or the Canadian case can be done on an anonymous basis. No one ever has to know that you're, I mean, you can be loud and vocal in the movement, but you can also support it and still keep your privacy.
there are people. Go ahead, Suzanne.
I was just going to say, maybe we should involve more kittens and puppies or something. People seem to respond well to that. I guess, the American expat is being vilified.
Yeah.
We do need a mascot. Maybe we should put out sort of a query about to everyone what our mascot should be and make it something cute.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah,
actually that might be a unifying principle. Actually, that's perhaps not a bad idea. My impression is, though, that it goes further than an unwillingness to support these things. I mean, I have seen from time to time statements that sort of say, well, if a lawsuit against FATCA or something is a decidedly bad idea, it could make things worse, and therefore it should not be done under any circumstances. I'm not sure I quite understand that logic. What do you think about that, Jenny?
I think FATCA is just it's hated. I mean, it's just got such a horrible reputation. There's just absolutely nothing good about it. You've had all this bad press about it for so long, and then and with my case, there was just the press coverage was immediately positive because everyone already hates FATCA so much. Everyone knows how horribly accidental Americans in particular have been treated. The IRS itself has said that it can't use the data. I mean, it's just causing problems for everybody, for the individuals and the banks and the tax authorities. I mean, it's going to go sooner or later. Something has to change, and in particular with GDPR and data protection rights and the wider awareness of data breaches and the risk to people's privacy. I mean, that's only going to become bigger and bigger, and the government can't keep on saying that we have all these data protection rights on the one hand, but on the other hand we're doing all these weird things with your financial data and not telling you anything about it. You can't have those things going together.
Yet, while we speak, more and more IGAs, intergovernmental agreements, are being signed around the world. So FATCA is still being promulgated by the United States to other countries.
Which I find interesting.
Yeah.
So that's why there
Canada,
needs
you know,
to
the
be a
cleaners
view, a
we were,
long-term view of the solution.
well, Canada could have hypothetically waited till now to sign, or later even. They were first to jump on, one of the first to jump on, and the correspondence I have with the Canadian government is tough luck. That's just the way it goes. And but
Well,
on
yeah,
that
the
note,
UK was
I
an
did write
early.
to I did write to Canada's revenue minister, Jen, and she did give me a response and actually sent me copies of the slips were sent with the first batch of FATCA
Data.
slip to the FATCA data to the IRS from the CRA. So it's surprising me with all this. I guess the data privacy laws apply to the government over there too, where they don't have to release that kind of information to you.
Well, data privacy is to protect the government, right?
Yeah,
Really
absolutely.
It would seem like it.
Well, the government
look,
thinks that they think that the law doesn't apply to them. It just applies to individuals, and sometimes.
well, they think it either doesn't apply to them, or to the extent that it does, is there to protect them from individuals.
Yeah, that's
You
why
know,
they refuse the freedom of information requests in the UK. So we have no idea what FATCA is doing. Which maybe that's why the IGAs continue to be signed, because the people who should be concerned about this and aware of it don't know. And when we ask, we're not told. We're told we can't have that information. So there needs to, more people need to be noisy. There needs to be more freedom of information requests, and more people writing to their MPs and things about this, because I think that's why they're getting away with it still, because people aren't, like we've been saying, people just aren't making enough noise about it, and they're not getting active about it.
but people are not making enough noise. Basically, we get back to something we were talking about earlier here. I really do not feel. I mean, having been involved in this for a long time, I really do not feel that the efforts that are being made, to get these things changed on many different levels, are receiving significant enough support from the people affected by it. I mean, that's my personal view of it. Do you all agree with me on that? Or?
Yeah, but I mean, in some ways, there's reasons. I mean, like you were saying before, some people just don't know. I mean, I wasn't aware of any of this till 2016. I didn't have a clue about.
But even of the people who know, right? So we've got
Yeah.
6,000 people in Keith's group. God knows how many people are aware of the Isaac Brock Society. There's definitely enough knowledge out there for there to be significant support for this, right? So the question is, why is there not? What can be done to enlist more support? And what can be done to get people to differentiate between a short-term reaction to their circumstances and dealing with this as a long-term issue?
Yeah.
I think the messaging has
That's
to
a
be
tough
very
one.
clear. What you just stated, John, is that, as I said before, and Suzanne, I believe touched on this, is based, again, and I'll be repetitive, based on an American overseas personal situation and what they need to do in the immediate to put a Band-Aid on their situation, whether that be comply and renounce, just renounce, or not comply at all. Those are all good short-term Band-Aids, but that should not negate being involved in this fight to change the policies and laws that have put these situations into play in the first place. That's
Okay,
the
so
bottom line.
all right, so I'm asking you a very simple question then. I'm not taking a position on the compliance issue, okay, but do you see non-compliance as a solution to the problem?
As an overall solution to the problem, full stop?
Yeah.
No. And I know some people might be disappointed in me saying that, because I actually am out there and I talk to people about the viable, this pragmatic decision of not complying. However, that's fine in the immediate, but that still doesn't change the long-term problem, because you never know as things move forward what could change. Example, the transition tax and GILTI. So by not complying, it should not just stop there. you still need to support all the initiatives that are being done in the United States with, let's say, George Holdings' bill, but also outside the United States with the work that Jenny is doing, with the work that the group in Canada is doing, with the work that Fabien is doing, with the work that Jude is doing, and I'll also add with the work that Monty Silver is doing with the transition tax and GILTI. All these things have to be supported to get a solution in the long term.
Maybe we need a kind of list of principles or tenets, like the Articles of Americans Abroad and Accidental Americans, AAAA, to say things like non-compliance is an option for an individual, but it is not a solution for our community. And the principle of taxing the tax residents of other countries is unacceptable. And just have, like, maybe you can on your on the American Expatriates Facebook group can have a sort of a list of all these principles to break it down and have us all be singing from the same sheet.
Well, this is why, I don't know, some time ago, I stopped calling this citizenship taxation, started calling it the problem of the United States imposing worldwide taxation on people who don't live in the United States and are tax residents of other countries.
And harvesting the data of those people. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to bring everybody, 1/10. But I guess the problem is that, it just sort of goes with the territory of what humanity is. Most people are interested in what they perceive as a solution to, or a reasonable reaction to how this stuff affects them. And one of the things that I find disappointing about this group in general is that, if it doesn't affect them, it's not an issue. It doesn't matter, sort of thing, right? You look at something like the transition tax, for example, or PFACs, or other aspects of this, and I think that this is a really, really serious problem. I mean, people have got to understand, rather than saying, "Well, it doesn't affect me," I think they need to be saying, "Oh my God, look at just what happened to this other guy." Something like that could happen.
How about it hasn't affected me yet? It doesn't mean it's never going to affect you. I mean, there are people who promote non-compliance, and that's their decision. But I'd like to ask them, does non-compliance make citizen taxation victimless? I don't think so.
No, not at all.
There are plenty of victims. So
not at all.
They're going to sit. What excuse do they have to sit back on their hands? They're involved in this. I mean, if they're going to feel that way, then just go away. Rather than.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to the extent that they, that the non-compliance message becomes synonymous with, the efforts of those who are trying to change the broader problem don't matter. I think that is a very serious problem.
Right, and it becomes
there's
synonymous
a hijacking process.
Right. Sorry, Suzanne?
It becomes
Suzanne, what were you saying?
It seems like there's an attempt to hijack the narrative, as there was on Brock.
Can you elaborate?
For those who are actually trying to do something and accomplish something, we're basically made to feel like idiots.
And their argument, I mean, it's irrelevant to the data transfer. And I've said before, I mean, when the data is going to be sent anyway, regardless of whether you're complying or not, your data is still being sent without your knowledge and without any information being given to you, and without you having any.
Great point.
Yeah, you don't have any security of, knowing what's happening to it, knowing who's looking after it, knowing how much is being sent and when, and that's another
not
thing
only
about,
that.
Yeah.
Your information is being sent to your, as in the case of Canada Revenue Agency.
Yeah, it's being
without
sent
any suspicion of wrongdoing. So they could dip into that anytime they want.
And
absolutely,
each time it's transferred, so from your bank to your CRA or HMRC and then to the IRS, each time there are risks of data breaches. And like you said about, not knowing what's coming up with the transition tax, another thing we don't know is when these data breaches are going to happen, because it's really not a question of if, it's when. I mean, the Bulgarian, their huge tax database of 5 million people, adults, taxpayers in Bulgaria was hacked. Every single person's data was affected by that, and then included data that was collected under CRS. So it's literally just a matter of time before FATCA data is breached. And then when people have identity theft and they're victim of these identity theft crimes, then maybe they'll get involved. But why wait till then?
Well,
Why not do
yeah,
something about it now?
and I
You
also
know,
take it to another. Excuse me, but I also take it to another degree, Jenny. Is that not only a data breach by some hacker or whatever, but who knows what the objective of that hacker is? Who knows
Yeah,
what they
yeah,
might want to be targeting Americans? And so they
yeah,
have all this data on all the Americans overseas who are
Yeah.
in Yemen, for example, or who are in Afghanistan,
yeah,
for example. And they have a nice package with a bow on how to go after Americans in those countries. And
yeah,
that's something that's not brought up enough.
yeah. It's a treasure
Yeah,
trove
there's things like
of data.
extortion, blackmail,
Yeah.
all kinds of
And
things.
and
Yeah.
rogue governments can also get hold of it and use it. And who knows, if the U.S. government, I mean, who knows what they're using it for? I mean, people were very uncomfortable to find out that the NSA was surveilling their telephone calls, and people don't like that. But
Right.
so I really don't understand why there isn't more outrage that our bank accounts, our financial information,
Yeah.
financial transactions are being
Yeah.
surveilled in bulk for no reason.
well, I think Americans as a culture don't believe in privacy, actually.
Hmm.
It's hard
Not
to
as
get them
compared
excited
to
about
Europeans.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
No, I
listening to
agree.
this, very interesting discussion. I have a thought, and I'd like to get your response on this. We talk about how this group of people affected by sort of the retail level. We have accidentals, expats. These are different people with different interests. What we have going on in this call are, talking about different aspects of the problem, the data transfer. We talked about the taxation itself, the creation of, tax. I wonder if it might not help the narrative if, we could bring all of these things together and, under some new kind of label, all right, that's an umbrella term for all of the evils of this type of thing, right? I'm not sure what that should be, but it's almost as though when people get started talking about this, they talk about the thing that they're most interested in, almost to the exclusion of the other stuff, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
somebody who's been
Right.
impacted by the transition tax doesn't care as much about data transfer. They care about see what I'm
Yeah.
saying here? But I mean,
Yes.
these are different heads of the same monster, right? And it seems to
Well,
me that we
I
need to
like to
decide what the monster is, right?
I have
I think
referred
Susan.
to it as being under siege. That's what it feels like,
Yeah.
You are under siege.
being
You are
under
under
siege
siege.
by the United States government, trying my best to comply at great expense, emotional toll, and not getting anywhere, actually just losing ground
Yeah.
Well, I think that
in the
what you
war.
described here is that you're having trouble complying, even though you want to, right?
What I don't want to do is lose my U.S. citizenship under these circumstances.
Well, you know what? I think that people are being forced out of U.S. citizenship.
Much to their chagrin and sadness
Due to
and anger.
treatment. Unfair treatment, that's what it is. No ifs, ands, or buts.
That's why everyone needs to focus on the long-term solution
Which is,
for these problems. For the U.S. to cease imposing its tax code on tax residents of other countries. Full stop. Regardless of what your band-aid is going to be in the immediate, or you have no problem, but you don't know in the future you're not going to have a problem in the future. This has to change, and that's where the focus needs to be in the United States as well as in people's resident countries. And even more important right now, in people's resident countries.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, some people just go straight into wanting to, I don't know, talk to their congressional representative of where they last lived 20 years ago. I mean, I think the first protocol should be your local representatives in the government that's basically, handing over your data to a foreign country for no
Right.
reason.
It's
Yeah,
got
They're
to be a
responsible
holistic.
for signing those
It's got to be
IGAs.
a holistic approach. It can't just be
Yeah.
within the American bubble. It has to
Yeah.
be in everybody's
Well,
resident countries.
with all respect, I tried that. I just got I was told directly from Canada's finance minister to get lost.
Well, but
Basically,
I think you
on
have
more
to
than
kind
one
of.
occasion.
Yeah, I thought you were like gum on a shoe, Suzanne.
Pardon?
Isn't that you, gum on a shoe? I mean,
Well,
I think you just kind of need to continue. I mean, one solution to this, okay, would be for countries to not allow the United States to define citizens who are resident in their country as U.S. citizens for any purpose at all.
Yes.
And I think that this has got to be moving in that direction. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. There's no reason in the world why I mean, the U.S. can define anybody it wants to as a citizen, within the country, but to weaponize citizenship by going out and defining residents of other countries as U.S. citizens, as trying to impose on them, that's a different thing altogether. And one of the things I find astounding, and I will repeat, astounding, is that one of the most important bedrock principles of the IGAs is that the U.S. and the U.S. alone gets to define who are U.S. persons for the purposes of the IGA.
Yeah.
They can change it on a whim, and it's incredible to me that not only is that that's not discussed, but that any country would agree to that anyway.
I mean, they could just
Incredible.
say, every single person living in London is now a U.S. taxpayer.
Exactly.
And
That's
take all their
exactly
data.
that's exactly right. And 5 or 6 years ago, I was doing some sort of a seminar, and I know this sounds far-fetched today, but I'm not so sure down the road. I mean, what's to stop the United States from defining everybody in the world a U.S. citizen,
Nothing.
moving to residence-based taxation, and exempting homeland Americans from income tax?
Nothing.
There you go.
Our
Absolutely
countries would,
nothing.
based on the letters that we've got from our MPs saying, it's up to the United States to define who pays U.S. taxes or who's a U.S. Taxable.
I think that is true. I think that is true within the territory of the United States. I do not believe that other countries have to accept this, and I don't think that they should. I mean,
No,
I think
I
it's
agree.
one thing for a country like Canada or, Britain, whatever, to agree to transfer information with respect to people who are, uh, tax residents only of the United States, right? Who are not tax residents of their country. For example, in Canada, there's a carve out, okay, for Canadian citizens if who. And basically, what it says is this: okay, if somebody was a Canadian citizen when a U.S. tax debt arose, the Canada Revenue Agency won't assist the IRS in collecting taxes. I don't know why the same principle wouldn't apply to FATCA reporting.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
why it's disproportionate. I mean, they're not. Yeah, they're not going to help them collect. I mean, we're not going to be. We won't owe anything anyway because we don't earn enough. And even if we did earn over the limit, we would be foreign tax credits. And even if there was all that going on, if we don't have anything in the United States, there's no way for them to collect anyway. So it's always going to be disproportionate for them to be sending our data, no matter what nonsense the U.S. wants to come up with.
I got a simple way of putting it. It is absolutely morally wrong and therefore should not go on.
Absolutely.
Right.
But we've been at this for a while. Why don't we close with each of the three of you giving a message to, we'll call them, individuals affected by this on the retail level, be they expats, be they long-term Americans abroad, be they dual citizens, be they accidental Americans. If you could give them one message, okay, what would it be? Let's start with you, Keith.
Oh boy. The one message would have to say, don't give up the fight. The fight is going to be long term, and stick with it. Stick with it, even when there are going to be bumps in the road. We got to stick with it and keep on doing and keep on supporting our respective initiatives, whether they be in the U.S. or in everybody's countries of residence. Don't give up.
Sort of like the difficult we do today, the impossible takes a little longer.
Right.
Suzanne?
Exactly.
What would be your
I
message?
don't know what to say. I'm feeling quite cynical right now. myself, I'll just keep being gum on a shoe and writing to people. Eventually, someone might do something, someone might listen, but then I, reflect back on what's happened in the last several years. We have a bill. Congressman Holding has a bill. I don't know what's going on. As far as I know, it's with Ways and Means, and Democrats abroad are involved in moving that along. I'm not sure what Republicans overseas are doing at this point. It's easy to be cynical because things are happening at glacial space that nothing will ever happen. But I do, as you believe, John, that something will eventually happen. It's a matter of time. I just don't know whether I'm going to be in the grave or not when it happens, or what it's going to take to
Well,
push
Suzanne,
it
even
over.
if you're on the grave, your tombstone will include a testament to your contribution. Okay. So, so look at it that way. So your message would be go out and get a pack of guns, chew it, and put it on the shoe of the congressman.
Yes.
Jenny, what would your message
be in
be?
their face?
I guess I would say your voice matters to all these people. Your voice matters so much. And I've loved to see all the comments that have gone on the Crowd Justice page. I had no idea how brilliant this, the Crowd Justice site was going to turn out to be with all these comments on it. And, even if, you can leave a comment, even if you only make this, the smallest donation, just whatever, just a few quid. I mean, it really makes a difference to have the number of supporters grow, and it will help the case to go forward. And I just don't think that it would be possible to get a better legal team in a better situation than this case has now. But it needs the funding to go ahead. So everyone who's left a contribution and left a comment on there just matters so much to me. And I also just want to thank you so much. And I mean, to all of you guys for all the work they've done for all these long years as well. That's just inspired me and made me kind of feel confident to go forward and do this. So yeah.
Well, Jenny, you've got a lot going for you. First of all, an advantage you have that we don't have in Canada is you got the GDPR, right? Which is something that has almost constitutional status that can be used to blunt this FATCA thing. You got a good law firm and you got, some good energy. But on the issue of the small contributions, our FATCA lawsuit in Canada obviously needs funding as well. But I'd like to point out, I don't know if you know this or not, we did raise $600,000 and it was all raised from small contributors. I don't think we had a single, I think we had one or two people who may have contributed as much as $10,000, but the rest of them were very small contributors. So if we can raise $600,000 from small contributors, I would have to think that you can do the same thing.
That's wonderful to know that. That's
all right. We've been at this for a while. This has been a really interesting chat. So Jenny, thanks very much for participating from England, from the United Kingdom, and moving way, way, way across the pond, Vancouver, Canada. Thank you very much, Suzanne.
And glad to be part of this.
My God, we even have somebody in the homeland, Keith Redmond.
For the moment.
And I'm sort of geographically in the center, I guess, in Toronto, Canada. Anyway.
It's the center of the world, isn't it?
Center of the world. Well, that's
at least
what
according to people who live in Toronto.
A lot of Torontonians think. I actually don't see it that way personally, but I do think it's an important city. Okay, so thanks very much, and we can do this again.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.